The Xiphorian Empire had conquered over 100 star systems, leaving behind only the ruins of civilizations that dared resist them. Their expansion was relentless, their military unmatched, and their technology so far advanced that they barely regarded humanity as a threat. Earth, to them, was just another primitive planet, ripe for annexation. Seated within the towering citadel of the Imperial fleet, Lord Vraxis observed a holographic display of Earth spinning before him. The blue-green planet was insignificant compared to the mighty worlds of the Empire. He scoffed, turning to his subordinate, Commander Kale. "This is a resistance we are meant to crush?" Vraxis sneered. "A race that still uses combustion engines? That fights with primitive kinetic weaponry." Kale nodded, his exosuit gleaming under the artificial lights of the command chamber. "Yes, my lord. Intelligence reports indicate their most advanced forces rely on tactics rather than technology. They call them special forces." Vraxis let out a harsh laugh. "Tactics? No amount of training can stand against our war machines. I have seen species with superior technology to these earthlings crumble before us." Kale hesitated. "Yet, my lord, some of our scout teams have reported difficulties. Human forces do not engage in direct combat. They strike from the shadows, dismantle supply chains, and disappear before retaliation is possible." Vraxis waved a dismissive hand. "Mere inconveniences. We will deploy shock troopers to their capital and crush their will to fight within days." The Galactic Empire's confidence was absolute. Their shock troopers were genetically enhanced warriors, clad in impenetrable armor, and armed with energy rifles capable of melting through steel. Against them, primitive human soldiers stood no chance. Or so they believed. The invasion begins. The Xiphorian fleet arrived in Earth's orbit without warning. Hundreds of massive warships, each capable of glassing entire continents, darkened the skies over major cities. Their initial assault was swift and brutal. Energy blasts rained down upon military installations, leveling air bases and naval fleets before they could even scramble a defense. The world's governments, realizing the futility of conventional warfare, were forced underground. The war seemed lost before it had even begun. But while Earth's leaders debated surrender, a different kind of warrior was preparing for battle. Deep within a hidden bunker in the Scottish Highlands, a select group of soldiers gathered. These were not conventional troops. They were members of the Special Air Service, the SAS. Among them was Captain Daniel Reeves, a man whose reputation for survival and unconventional warfare was legendary. A general stood before them, his face grim. "Gentlemen, our planet has been invaded by an enemy beyond anything we've ever faced. Conventional forces have failed. Governments are crippled, but that's where we come in." Reeves folded his arms, his sharp eyes studying the holographic map of occupied London. "We hit them where it hurts," he said. "They expect us to fight their way, head-on, with brute force. We fight our way, covert, precise, and lethal." The general nodded. "Their command structure relies on central coordination. We disrupt their communications, sabotage their supply chains, and take out their leaders. The Xiphorians think we're weak. We'll show them just how wrong they are." As the SAS operatives geared up, Reeves took a deep breath. He had fought in war zones across the world, but this was different. This time, Earth itself was at stake. The first encounter. Reeves' first mission took him deep into occupied London. The Xiphorians had turned the city into a fortress, with patrols of towering shock troopers enforcing martial law. Surveillance drones hovered overhead, scanning for human resistance. Moving through the ruins of an old warehouse, Reeves watched as a squad of Xiphorian soldiers rounded a corner. They were arrogant, walking openly in the streets as if they had already won. He waited until they passed, then moved swiftly, placing an explosive charge against a key power relay. A few seconds later, the device detonated, plunging several city blocks into darkness. The Xiphorians were thrown into confusion, their energy shields flickering. Before they could react, Reeves struck. A silenced round from his sniper rifle took out the lead soldier, his armor form crumpling to the ground. The others turned in shock, their energy weapons lighting up the darkness. But Reeves was already gone, disappearing into the shadows. Panic spread through the enemy ranks. They had never faced an adversary who struck from the darkness and vanished before retaliation. Vraxus received the report with disdain. One soldier? One human did this. Kale's expression was grim. Yes, my lord. And he is not alone. They are trained in asymmetric warfare. They are ghosts. Vraxus clenched his jaw. Then let us see how these ghosts fare when the full might of the Empire is brought upon them. But even as more Xiphorian forces descended upon Earth, Reeves and his team were already planning their next strike. The war for Earth had just begun. The world was burning, but Captain Daniel Reeves had no time to mourn. The Xiphorians had underestimated Earth's ability to fight, and now it was time to prove that human ingenuity, grit, and experience could stand against overwhelming alien technology. The SAS had always thrived in impossible conditions, and Reeves was about to turn this war into something the Xiphorians had never faced: unconventional, precise, and relentless warfare. Behind enemy lines, Reeves crouched behind the remains of a collapsed building in the ruins of occupied London. His pulse steady despite the chaos around him. The Xiphorians had doubled their patrols after his last attack, and now surveillance drones hovered over every street. Towering shock troopers stalked through the debris, their energy rifles glowing in the darkness. But Reeves wasn't here to engage in a firefight. He was on a mission, one that could shift the tide of the war. His target was a Xiphorian command post established inside what was once the British Museum. Intelligence suggested that this outpost coordinated troop movements across Europe. If he could take it down, he could cripple the enemy's ability to respond to future resistance attacks. Reeves tapped his earpiece. "Fox, do you copy?" A voice crackled in his ear. "Loud and clear, Captain. You're 5 minutes from target. We've identified 3 entry points, but security's tight. What's the plan?" Reeves smirked. "We do it the SS way, quiet and deadly. Silent entry. Approaching the museum was suicide from ground, so Reeves opted for the rooftops. He moved with the practiced grace of a predator, leaping between crumbling buildings, his silenced rifle slung across his back. He reached a vantage point overlooking the command post. A dozen Xiphorians stood guard at the entrance, their massive forms illuminated by the eerie glow of their weapons. But they weren't the problem. The real issue was the energy shield surrounding the building, an impenetrable force field powered by a generator inside. Reeves adjusted his night vision goggles. "Fox, I see the power source. East wing, 2nd floor. I'm going in." "Roger that. Captain, be careful. These bastards don't go down easy." Reeves didn't plan on fighting them directly. Instead, he moved like a ghost, descending from the rooftop and slipping through a ventilation shaft. The interior of the museum was a mix of ancient history and alien occupation. Statues and artifacts stood untouched while Xiphorian soldiers patrolled the hallways. He pressed himself against the wall, watching as 2 soldiers passed. Their armor was nearly impervious to small arms fire, but their necks were exposed. That was all he needed. Moving in a blur, Reeves slipped behind the first soldier, wrapping an arm around his throat and driving his combat knife upward into the weak point under its jaw. The alien barely made a sound before collapsing. The second turned an alarm, but before it could react, Reeves had already drawn his suppressed pistol and fired 2 shots into its throat. The bodies hit the floor silently. Reeves dragged them into the shadows and kept moving. Sabotage and deception. The generator room was unguarded. Another sign of the Xiphorian arrogance. They truly believed their technology made them invincible. Reeves set his charges, rigging the power source with enough explosives to send it straight to hell. He tapped his earpiece. "Charges set. Give me 2 minutes. Then light up their comms with false intel. Let's make them chase ghosts." "Roger that, Captain. Sending fake distress calls now." As Reeves moved toward his extraction point, the Xiphorian comms exploded with chatter. Reports of false attacks and enemy movements flooded their systems, sending their forces scrambling in different directions. Then, the charges went off. The explosion shook the building, and the energy shield flickered before collapsing entirely. Reeves didn't stop to admire his work. He sprinted toward the exit as sirens blared. The escape. Reeves reached the outer perimeter just as a squad of Xiphorian shock troopers arrived. They spotted him immediately, their glowing visors locking onto his position. Engaging human resistance fighter. One of them barked in their guttural language. Reeves dug behind cover as energy blasts tore through the air. His rifle wouldn't penetrate their armor, but he wasn't aiming for them. He fired at a crumbling balcony above them. The weakened structure collapsed, sending chunks of stone and metal crashing onto the enemy squad. Before they could recover, Reeves was already moving, disappearing into the ruins as the Xiphorians scrambled to respond. "Fox, I'm out. Any sign of pursuit?" "Negative. They're too busy dealing with the chaos you caused. Get to the extraction point. Your ride's waiting." As Reeves slipped into the shadows, he allowed himself a small smile. The Xiphorians had entered this war expecting an easy victory. Instead, they had found a nightmare they weren't prepared for. And this was just the beginning. The Xiphorian Empire had never faced an enemy like this. Their conquest of Earth was supposed to be swift, a show of overwhelming force, met with submission and surrender. But instead of broken, defeated humans, they encountered a new kind of warfare, one they were utterly unprepared for. Captain Daniel Reeves and his team of elite SAS operatives had turned the tide. Their sabotage had crippled the Xiphorian command structure in Europe, and their tactics had sown confusion and paranoia among the invaders. But the war was far from over. Now, Earth's resistance had to go on the offensive, coordinating the resistance. Reeves stood inside a dimly lit underground bunker, studying a holographic map of occupied London. Around him, representatives from various special forces groups, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Spetsnaz, and other elite units, listened as he laid out their next move. "We've disrupted their command structure," Reeves said, pointing to key locations on the map. "But the Xiphorians are adapting. They're tightening security, increasing patrols, and deploying more war machines. We can't let them regain control." A French commando, Major Rousseau, folded his arms. "You're suggesting we take the fight directly to them?" Reeves nodded. "Not in a conventional battle. We'll use asymmetric warfare, hit-and-run tactics, sabotage, assassinations. We'll turn their occupation into a living nightmare." The plan was simple but deadly. Small, highly trained teams would infiltrate key enemy installations worldwide, destroying supply lines, hacking communications, and eliminating high-ranking officers. The Xiphorians thought they were the hunters, but Reeves and his team were about to make them the hunted, striking fear into the invaders. The first target was a Xiphorian weapons facility in Berlin. The enemy had begun producing energy-based artillery, which could devastate human strongholds if deployed. Reeves led a team of SAS and Spetsnaz operatives on the mission. Under the cover of night, they infiltrated the facility, avoiding drone surveillance and automated turrets. The Xiphorians relied heavily on technology, but Reeves knew that no machine could outthink a well-trained soldier. Using suppressed weapons and silent takedowns, the team moved to the facility, planting explosives at key locations. Reeves personally made his way to the command center, where a Xiphorian officer was overseeing production. The alien barely had time to react before Reeves pressed a knife to its throat. "Your empire made a mistake coming here," he whispered before silencing the creature permanently. As the team exfiltrated, the charges detonated. The entire weapons facility was consumed in flames, and the Xiphorians were left scrambling to understand how their supposedly invincible defenses had been breached. The assassination of Lord Vraxis. With Earth's resistance gaining momentum, Reeves set his sights on the ultimate target, Lord Vraxis himself. The Xiphorian commander had relocated to a heavily fortified base in New York, believing that human forces were too weak to mount a direct assault. He was wrong. Reeves and a team of elite operatives infiltrated the city under the cover of chaos. Resistance fighters had launched diversionary attacks, drawing Xiphorian forces away from the command center. Meanwhile, Reeves and his team moved through the sewers, bypassing external defenses. Inside the base, they encountered heavy resistance. Shock troopers guarded every corridor, but human special forces had one major advantage. They were unpredictable. Using guerrilla tactics, explosives, and close-quarters combat, they tore through the defenses. Reeves finally reached Vraxis's personal chambers. The Xiphorian warlord stood in his ceremonial armor, his red eyes glowing with fury. "You think a mere human can challenge me," he growled. Reeves didn't respond. He raised his rifle and fired. The bullet sparked off Raxus's armor, but Reeves had anticipated this. He rolled to the side, drawing his combat knife and lunging forward. Vraxus swung a massive blade, but Reeves was faster. He dodged, driving his knife into the gap between the Zyphorian's armor plates. The alien let out a roar of pain, staggering backward. "You should have left Earth alone," Reeves said coldly, before driving the knife into Vraxus's throat. As the warlord collapsed, the Zyphorian forces fell into disarray. Their leader was dead, their command chain shattered. The beginning of the end. With Vraxus gone, the Zyphorian invasion started to crumble. Their forces, once disciplined and relentless, became chaotic and disorganized. Earth's resistance pressed the advantage, striking at weakened enemy positions. The mighty Galactic Empire, which had scoffed at Earth's special forces, was now retreating. Reeves watched from a rooftop as Zyphorian ships began their withdrawal. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over. The Empire would remember this defeat, and Earth would be ready. The war should have been over. Lord Vraxus was dead. The Zyphorian forces were in disarray, and their warships were retreating from Earth's atmosphere. But Captain Daniel Reeves knew better. The Galactic Empire wasn't built on mercy. It was built on domination. They wouldn't just abandon their conquest so easily. Standing atop a ruined skyscraper in New York, Reeves watched the distant glow of Zyphorian ships ascending back into space. The battle for Earth had been won, but something still felt off. He tapped his earpiece. "Fox, give me a status update. Are they actually retreating?" His intelligence officer responded after a brief pause. "Captain, I don't think so. Their fleet isn't jumping to hyperspace. They're repositioning." Reeves clenched his jaw. The Zyphorians weren't retreating. They were regrouping. The Empire's last strike. An urgent call came through the Resistance network. A massive Zyphorian dreadnought, the Tyrant's Wrath, had moved into low orbit over the Atlantic. It wasn't leaving. It was preparing to launch a final, desperate assault. "They're going to glass the planet," Major Russo said over the comms. "If they can't conquer Earth, they'll destroy it." Reeves felt his stomach tighten. The Zyphorians had suffered an unprecedented defeat, and now they were lashing out. Their main weapon, the planetary annihilation beam, was charging up. In less than an hour, the Empire would wipe entire continents off the map. "We can't let that happen," Reeves said. "We take out that ship." The final mission. Reeves and his team had pulled off impossible missions before, but this one was different. They had no fleet, no air superiority. Just a handful of Special Forces operatives and stolen Zyphorian tech. The plan was insane. Steal a Zyphorian transport, infiltrate the Tyrant's Wrath, and destroy the weapon from the inside. If they failed, Earth would burn. Using cloaking technology salvaged from a downed enemy craft, Reeves and a small strike team disguised themselves as Zyphorian soldiers. They hijacked an enemy transport and approached the dreadnought under the guise of an emergency docking. Inside the ship, the Zyphorians barely questioned them. Their forces were still reeling from Vraxus's assassination, and their chain of command was broken. Reeves and his team moved swiftly, navigating through the alien corridors toward the ship's power core. A race against time. The countdown had begun. The planetary annihilation beam was minutes away from firing. Reeves planted explosives along the core's coolant systems, ensuring a catastrophic overload. But just as they were about to escape, alarms blared. The Zyphorians had discovered them. "Damn it!" Fox's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Reeves, you need to detonate those charges now. If you don't, Earth is finished." Reeves looked at the timer. There wasn't enough time to set a remote detonation. Someone had to do it manually. His team stared at him, realizing what had to be done. "Captain," one of them started. "No arguments," Reeves said firmly. "Get back to the transport. That's an order." They hesitated, but obeyed. As the team escaped, Reeves remained behind. He pressed the detonator just as the Zyphorian guards stormed into the chamber. The explosion ripped through the ship. The Tyrant's Wrath shook violently as its core went into meltdown. Flames erupted through the corridors, and the Zyphorian crew scrambled in panic. In his final moments, Reeves watched through a viewport as the Earth remained untouched. He had won. The explosion consumed him as the dreadnought detonated in a fiery blast. The legacy of a warrior. Back on Earth, the Resistance forces watched as the tyrant's wrath was obliterated. The Xiphorian fleet, leaderless and demoralized, finally retreated. The war was over. Earth had survived. But the victory came at a cost. Reeves was gone. A month later, at a hidden military base, a memorial was held. Soldiers from every nation and Special Forces unit attended. Reeves' name was etched into history, not just as a soldier, but as a man who had turned the tide against an intergalactic empire. Fox stood at the podium, his voice heavy with emotion. Captain Daniel Reeves wasn't just a warrior. He was a symbol of what humanity is capable of. The Xiphorians thought they could break us. But because of him, they learned the truth. Earth doesn't surrender. As the crowd saluted, the message was clear. The Galactic Empire had underestimated Earth once. They would never make that mistake again.